All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what time zone you're in. This is the first of our talk shows for the Saturday of our 2024 Armchair Dragoons Digital Convention. We've got the folks from the International Kriegsspiel Society here going to be giving y'all a talk, and I'm going to get off screen and let them take over. So Jan, Paul, let you guys deal with introductions and everything else, and I'm getting out of the way here.
Thanks a lot. We'll be talking about Kriegsspiel today, which is sort of funny because it was the ACDC 2021 in June, I believe, when I played my very first game of Kriegsspiel, and now I'm presenting to you. We two, Paul and I, we are master umpires at the International Kriegsspiel Society and also members of the admin staff. The IKS is an international community with almost 2,000 members from all around the globe, but we get into that in about a second. So what we want to do today is talk about the Prussian Kriegsspiel. As you might have imagined, it's not quite possible to cover 200 years of wargaming in just 1 hour. So I'll be talking a bit about the sort of main era of the Prussian Kriegsspiel from 1824 to 1906. And then we swap over to Paul and we talk about what we can do with Kriegsspiel today. By the way, if you have any questions, as Brandt is pointing out in the chat, put them in the chat. We are happy to answer them as we go and as we see fit, but there should also be some additional time for further questions and discussion in the end. So, what is Kriegsspiel? There are several sort of ingredients we need for a classical Prussian Kriegsspiel, and I won't get too much into the prehistory of it all, but I want to mention some of the developments that happened before 1824. There had been several attempts to design a game that would portray warfare and combat and so forth at a sort of accurate scale. Namely, Helwig's Kriegsspiel might be familiar to some, first published in 1780, then eventually developed further up to 1803 in several versions. Most of these early games, though, they were very complicated, expanded versions of chess. So imagine a chessboard that has many more grids than the usual chessboard, and your pieces are replaced by blocks of cavalry, infantry, and artillery, for example. Sometimes there are even political and logistical pieces involved in those games. One of the most important early games, though, is the one designed by Opitz and published in 1806. This game introduced dice to resolve combat, and that is a very important thing we'll be coming back to. You can see on the right-hand side here in the background, there is it's called the dice. It shows several dice actually, 6 of them, the various sides. You would cut these pieces out and glue them on dice. These one you can see in the background there from the 1828 version. They would be used. I go into how the dice really work later on. And in front of there on the right-hand side, you see a modern, reworked, slightly streamlined version, which is available at Command Post Games. And then we have a very important step. In 1812, Georg von Reiswitz the Elder finished his game, which you can see on the left-hand side, das taktische Kriegsspiel, the tactical Kriegsspiel, which basically is sort of a tabletop miniatures game. It still uses the dice that had been introduced, and it uses grids. In this case, those are 3D sculpted terrain tiles on which you would place your unit blocks. So it's a further improvement from the classical plain chessboard. Now you have 3D terrain, units moving around, and you're rolling dice. But all the players are still all around this one table, and they are discussing the situations, and you can see everything as in a god mode, so to say. Then we have another. So now we have blocks and we have dice, but there's another ingredient we need, and that is maps. Maps are very important. Why is that? Because at the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, maps and high detailed maps really became available. Maps were very rare before that. Even when thinking about the Napoleonic period, the Grande Armée had issues to find maps of Russia, for example, detailed maps they could use for their operations. And they had to send out their spies to actually steal good copies and use them to prepare for the invasion. What we can see here on the left-hand side is the battlefield of Austerlitz, as shown in the Josephinische Landesaufnahme from, I believe, 1764. Yes, indeed. This is at the 1 to 20,000 scale, but it's still fairly detailed compared to the maps of earlier periods. And then on the right-hand side, you can see in the background, this is the city of Leipzig, a map set that was specifically produced for Kriegsspiel in the 1 to 8,000 scale. As you can see here, zoomed in the center, this is even more detailed. It's a topographical map, and it's very important because officers need to be able to read maps. It's like I don't know, the introduction of the smartphone, so to say. Like imagine you are in the I don't know 1970s, and someone puts a smartphone in your hand. What you're going to do with that? How do you use it? That's basically the situations young officers were in the 19th century. So they needed to get familiarized with maps and able to read them and make informed decisions for combat situations based on that. So now we have blocks, dice, and maps, so we can move blocks on maps if we wanted to. We don't have to sculpt 3D terrain anymore. However, there is still something missing in there. And the guy we see on the right-hand side, that is Georg von Reiswitz the Younger, the son of the elder. He thought that all of the games that had been designed up to that point still didn't quite get the essence of war and didn't portray it accurately. So what he did, he added to the game friction and fog of war. And if you know your Clausewitz well, you know those are two very important concepts when it comes to the theory and the praxis of war. So how did he do that? He did introduce the Umpire, the game master, or der Vertraute in German, who would adjudicate the game and thus make the game double blind, even though the term is not quite technically accurate. Players or teams would be isolated from each other. So each team, we can see that in the center here, we see a table, and there's a sort of a visual screen in between. That is one option to do it. There are other options where actually the teams are in different rooms. They have their own tables, their own maps. They are isolated from each other. And all they want to do has to be transmitted via the umpire. So all the orders they want to give, all the communication, the combat would be resolved, and the reports would be handed back from the umpire team, which would, historically speaking, in the 1824 system and in most of the systems, historical systems, would be resolved in 2-minute intervals, 2-minute turns at the umpire table. Even Reiswitz, though, is already aware that that is in some cases not possible, especially if you want to portray larger combat situations with several divisions. That won't work. So he says that's all right. It just takes longer to resolve, and then we go back to the players and hand them their reports. And the players on their maps also only have their own pieces basically in the beginning, and what they can see from the position they decide to locate their sort of player avatar, the headquarter, or whatever on the map. If they are on a hill, on let's go back to the maps maybe. If they are sort of in this position here on this hill, or let's say on the Pratzen Heights, then they can of course see further than if they were not. And if they can then see enemy units, then the umpire would hand that player or the team blocks in the other color. So those games would be played with blocks colored in blue and in red, which somewhat stuck to Wargaming, and would then hand out the pieces. You can see 2-3 battalions or whatnot, and place them on the map as the players can see them. When this game was then demoed to the chief of the Prussian General Staff von Müffling, he very famously said, "This is not a game, this is a school of war." And very shortly afterwards, the game was introduced in the Prussian army as a mandatory training tool for junior officers. So they actually had to run a Kriegsspiel game in order to get promoted. However, there are several issues with this game or with the system, which led to the update, the supplement to the rules of 1828 by a society of officers from various different arms, from infantry, cavalry, and artillery. They found that the casualty numbers or ratios Reiswitz had included, which were based on Scharnhorst's tests, were far too high, far too unrealistic, and that the game was too complicated to run. So they tried to streamline it a little bit, changed the numbers in the back, and they introduced this sort of die table, which was still more complex when it came to Reiswitz's system. Furthermore, Kriegsspiel was mostly designed, promoted, and run by young officers. So those had to face criticism, resistance, and jealousy by higher-ranking officers, which actually might be one of the reasons why Reiswitz committed suicide in 1827. Okay. No questions so far, it seems. We continue. We jump quite a bit, but since 1828, there had been several systems designed to try to streamline the system, who tried to update the system. As you can see in the center here, this is an overview of at least the rigid Kriegsspiel systems published between 1824 and 1903. 1824, yeah, that was right, and 1903. As you can see, some of those are republished, so that those are updated iterations, basically taking into account new doctrine, new technology when it comes to weapons and communications. But there were more systems than those, some of which just simply didn't survive. One of which was designed by one Helmut von Moltke, who might be familiar, at the Magdeburg garrison in the 1840s. And that would be quite interesting to have, because he was a quite avid Kriegsspieler and did promote that. And his tactical problems then later were sort of a Kriegsspiel as a choose your own adventure book game, if you want to. One important thing I didn't mention before is that the Prussians did not represent the adversary armies, really. They assumed that both sides would be acting under Prussian doctrine and use the Prussian weapons and technology available, just because all the participants were, of course, Prussian officers. Okay, so there's further streamlining going on, and in 1862, the most important system, I guess, was published by Wilhelm von Chischwitz. It's still considered to be one of the most stable, rigid, so rules-based and dice-involved Kriegsspiel systems we have. And with the lightning success then of 1866 and 1870-71 in the Austro-Prussian and Franco-Prussian Wars, Kriegsspiel eventually spread around the globe. Actually, there was already a Russian translation of the 1824 rules, but then with the 60s and 70s, Kriegsspiel systems were translated. They were implemented in the UK, in Sweden, in Russia and Austria, even in Brazil. And then one of the latest like major powers to implement Kriegsspiel were the US then. So that's quite interesting. All right. Oh yeah, I wanted to go into a little bit into this picture here. On the left-hand side in the background, you can see Chischwitz's system in play on a map portraying a combat situation in the Battle of Königgrätz in 1866. I go into that situation later on. And on the right-hand side, we can see that this is a little bit more streamlined than what we have seen in the 1828 rules. This is what's called the Würfeltabelle, the dice table. This is basically a combat strength ratio table, which helps you select the die which you want to roll in a given combat situation. So you start from assessing the combat strength. So do we have 1 battalion fighting against 4 squadrons of cavalry, for example? Then you pick a specific die, and then you adjust the die number, not the ratio, but the die number based on the conditions on the battlefield. So let's say the battalion is wavering, so it will get a worse die. And then let's say the cavalry, however, I don't know, is charging down a steep hill, which is very difficult for horses to do, so they get 2 dice worse. And then you pick the die, and Chischwitz is no longer using printed or glued on dice with complicated tables. He's using this one here to resolve the combat, simply using a d6. Like, let's say we have decided to pick die number 3, this one here. Then you roll a d6 and see what the outcome is. And you have red outcomes and black outcomes. The red ones are that the formation that is in the more advantageous position would lose the combat. The black one is that the disadvantaged unit will lose the combat. And then the R, G, and T tells you how badly the loser is beaten and has to retreat and is not allowed for an amount of time to engage in combat again. The numbers on this die are close combat casualties, and then here we have another table for artillery and small arms fire. Now, there were still issues with all that. Who can run me a game? Many officers found that it was still too complicated to run a game. Reiswitz already said an umpire should learn the system step by step, and it would take several games to add aspects and more complexity, and still they wouldn't really be able to resolve 2-minute turns, right? So what happened was that in 1874, Jakob Meckel published his study on Kriegsspiel, arguing that instead of using a rules-heavy system, that should be skipped, and umpires should rather just assess the situation and then maybe roll a d6 and decide the combat on that without any detailed loss tables and whatnot. And an even more radical approach than was in 1876 by Benoit du Verdi, who argued that dice should not be taken into consideration whatsoever, and thereby the free Kriegsspiel, so free of rules and free of dice, was born. And this sort of led to the end of the era of the classical Prussian Kriegsspiel in 1906 with a very devastating evaluation of the rigid systems by Altrock, which sort of made it appear that the rigid systems weren't used and weren't really played and all that, but that's not quite true. Even in the 1870s and onwards, rigid systems, rules-based systems were still developed and played, of course. However, then with the early 20th century and the preparations for World War I and World War II, Kriegsspiel really diversified and became much more than a tactical combat simulation. It really turned into more of what we understand as modern wargaming today, right? So I think still we are on to a very bright future. Kriegsspiel is still played today, even by the military. On the right-hand side, we can see the US Army War College with single players isolated here by this view screen, and the assistant umpire, it seems, is sending out a report here and explaining the situation around the commander piece up on this hill, what he can see in this situation. And I personally had the pleasure to visit the Führungsakademie in Hamburg, which is the German Command Staff College, in November last year, and participate in a session there hosted by Professor Jorrit Wintjes of the University of Würzburg and the Conflict Simulation Group, which was quite a pleasure. That was the game you see down here is the same one as we had on the previous slide. We played a Prussian division against the Saxon division on the far right flank of the Prussian army at Königgrätz. Funnily enough, none of the other players had played Kriegsspiel before. So the German military really only rediscovered Kriegsspiel like 5 years ago, and it's slowly starting to get a little bit more traction, although of course there are all the other types of wargaming, of modern wargaming, that are played. So I think there is still a lot of benefit in playing Kriegsspiel today. And as we are switching over to Paul, who goes a little bit more into detail how that could look like, here are 2 suggestions. If you want to get an overview of the history of Kriegsspiel, you should look at Vigo, the German Wargaming, and Wintjes, a School for War Brief History of the Prussian Kriegsspiel. Do we have any further questions to the history? The game comes out and everybody homebrews the rules. Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very beautiful thing. Even in the International Kriegsspiel Society today, we have plenty of different rule sets for various periods, for various perspectives of combat situations. And we do have constant debates about what should be included, what should be represented, and what not. And all these systems keep sort of evolving and developing and changing over time, which I think is a very, very beautiful thing. All right, Paul, over to you.
Thanks so much, Jan. You have now heard an excellent overview of the Kriegsspiel system from 1824 all the way up through to some of the military applications for today and professional applications. So I'm now going to take you in a completely other direction to talk about some of the spirit of what we're doing today. And I'm going to start by talking about a time that I tried to introduce a laser into a traditional Dungeons and Dragons game. So I'm a young dungeon master, and we had played many very traditional orc slash hack goblins, mages, all of the traditional Dungeons and Dragons games. And I had gone through this over and over, and I had a problem because I was an avid science fiction fan. And so though I appreciated Tolkien and some of the original works and some of the fantasy, I really was a science fiction fan. So I had this brainstorm that though my friends enjoyed a fantasy milieu, I thought I would introduce some science fiction to the game. So what I did was I created a scenario where I snuck in science fiction, and the entire premise was that there was a machine that created the magic, and that they would have to go through this facility to find this machine. And I thought that my idea was quite clever. And so I set this entire game up, got together with my friends, and off we went. And they went through the first introductory rooms, and then they went into this room where they found this metal object, and it was quite large. And so as they were walking around the metal object in this role-playing game and asking questions about what it was and the different dynamics of the object itself, and I was feeding them the different pieces of information, I was feeling more and more clever about how I had created this world and this environment. And then one of my friends just stopped and looked and said, "It's a car." And the entire group groaned. And everyone rolled their eyes. And I realized in that moment that I'd made a horrible error. And I tried to transition out of the traditional fantasy realm. The problem was we were only at the beginning of this session. We had nothing else to do. And I was responsible for entertaining my friends. And I had an entire setup that was science fiction. So what did I do? In that moment, I pivoted. And I basically took each room from that point and transitioned it back into fantasy. So if there was a room where there was 2 lasers that were going to um, create an ambush, I created that as 2 archers that were going to ambush them. And if there was another room where they were going to float off the floor because of anti-gravity, then there was actually a spell that did it. And by the end of the night, everyone was happy. Everyone said, "Well, that was really wild. We were in this facility from the future, but it was really just a good old game," and everybody was happy. And that experience has always stuck with me, and it's stuck with me all the way through to discovering and enjoying Kriegspiel, because a couple of things I learned from that were I had originally thought the cleverness of my idea was the game, when in fact that was not the game. The game was the enjoyment of people co-creating an experience together. And as you hear the history of Kriegspiel, and if you listen to the stories that Jan was telling, in fact, it was the umpires and the junior officers in the Prussian day. In the modern day, it's the umpire as well as the um, junior officers or the cadets that are learning. And it's that social co-creation of an experience that creates either the learning from a military perspective or the entertainment from a hobby gamer's perspective. And so as we move forward in the world in terms of the technology that's available to us, we certainly have things like Total War, and we have these different technologies that will allow us to scale these very large battles and have a very full and uh, complex experiences. Um, there's no question that the technology can take us there, but we want to make sure at the International Kriegsspiel Society that we're bringing forward that social element. And we think there's an advantage to ensuring that the double-blind live umpired experience that is Kriegspiel, that started all the way back in 1824, can be brought forward to take advantage of technology, not necessarily to solely rely upon it. So we, if you think about the rise of artificial intelligence today, and I'm uh, a, a player of the operational art of war. I have been since the early days. I think I know we're on version 4 now, and I was started on version 2. And if you think about AI and what AI has done for us today, is you can actually play the operational art of war and not even participate. You can pick your scenario. You can have the AI play both sides. You can just sit back and watch and be delighted as you see the ongoing back and forth. But it's like watching, an unscripted television show. The technology is running the game for you. Custer can fight the Native Americans, and it seems like the computer always has Custer win. So this is certainly available to us today. At the Kriegsspiel Society, we actually are not trying to replicate necessarily the exact Prussian experience from 1824. We're not trying to recreate a staff experience from those days. What we're actually looking to do is extract the human element that I had experienced at that Dungeons and Dragons games all those years ago. And we're extracting the interaction and the co-creation of experience that happens in a Kriegspiel environment. So that double-blind live umpired experience, we've actually taken and adapted outward to create a play-by-mail experience. So you can have the umpire sitting in the center who will send reports in either direction, and we create that in such a way, in an asynchronous way, so that people can actually enjoy Kriegspiel asynchronously, and they can enjoy it in a time that fits with their real life. So it's not a 4-hour session necessarily. It could be a 1-month session that's done by email. So our mission at the International Kriegsspiel Society is to preserve and to propagate Kriegspiel, not specifically by recreating it as it was in the golden age of the mid 1800s, but is actually to bring the ideas forward and use technology. You can tell from some of my images that we're not afraid of technology at the International Kriegsspiel Society. And so the way that we propagate this is we just bring the message of double-blind live umpired simulation to folks, and we show them this format because we think the format has some very powerful opportunities. So one of the things that this format allows is for scaling. So we can create very large games by using this human-centered way of doing it. So this is a Discord channel from our Grand Waterloo game. This game had over 65 players in it. We had, I think there was about 18, 19 umpires. We had to, the game was so large, we had to use 2 maps and had to sector out the battlefield because there was just too many units to fit on a screen. So we actually exceeded technology's ability to handle it. So the Grand Waterloo game was we fought it down actually to the brigade level. We took about 8 hours, and it was a tremendous experience, and everybody really enjoyed that. So the human, this technology that was invented back in the 1800s allows us to create very large games, and really it's just people on a Discord server at the end of the day. A second advantage that we have here is that it's free. So you can actually join the International Kriegsspiel Society. You don't have to pay. You don't have to buy any tech. You don't have to buy any software. You don't have to have anything more than a free Discord account, and you get all your text channels and you get all your images in the Discord. And in fact, this can go anywhere. So you can run a Kriegspiel on email. You can run a Kriegspiel on text on your phone. Many of our players that will actually use their phone to play. So the technology itself is free, and therefore anyone can try it, and the barrier to trial is actually very, very low. Another advantage of the format that we really like, that actually harkens back to my science fiction experiment as a young dungeon master, is that we can go into any niche and actually deliver on that niche. So here's a couple of screenshots to show you. On the left is it's a siege of an Ottoman fort from the Habsburg Ottoman War from 1526, and this is the siege of Sexard, which was a historical siege. And the entire premise of this game was to demonstrate how the Ottomans would create these small forts called palankas, and how they would defend them in the spirit of the defense. And you see there the Habsburg forces outnumber the Ottomans, but the Ottomans are going to dig in and make a last stand. So this would never be commercialized. You would never find a set of figurines or minis that you could buy to cover this period accurately. You would have to 3D print your palanka, all these kind of things, and it was essentially just intellectual capital, and time to create a scenario, and it was fascinating. I really enjoyed that. On the right, we have Bunker Hill from the American War of Independence. Fascinating piece here is that the entire premise was switched so that the British were going to attack from a completely different direction, and this was just an idea that cost basically nothing. So like my early Dungeons and Dragons idea where I had to switch very quickly, but it really cost me nothing to switch that science fiction module into a fantasy module, we're able to create very niche games that are really just that come from the passion of the person who creates it. In fact, just yesterday I was interacting with some folks who had created a hypothetical scenario where people from Colorado were going to invade the people in Wyoming, and then there was a modern scenario with all sorts of I-25, which is the highway. If you're not familiar with it, played a big part in the defense, which is actually quite funny because I'm sitting in Denver, Colorado right now. So, so anything that comes from the imagination can be done in a Kriegsspiel. Kriegsspiel is a system that allows for any scenario to be explored, and we certainly have our share of Star Wars and Warhammer and different formats, and it's all done in the same spirit that the Prussians originally envisioned it, and that's that fog of war, the double blind, and your ability to only see a portion of the battlefield. What's really exciting about our community is skill building. So here's a map that was built by one of our members who learned how to build maps by talking to other members. And so we have people use free software. They could use a whole variety of free softwares or paid softwares to learn how to build maps from scratch. And if you remember from Jan's portion of the presentation about what is one of the key components, it's the map in the playing field, if you will. And so this is a map built by someone who learned with us. I myself have tremendously improved my map building skills. But if you take that and extend it, we could also talk about rule sets. So because Kriegsspiel's mechanism is really human beings passing information back and forth in such a way that it makes it interesting, the rule sets that we use on top of that are anywhere from homebrew rules that an umpire will think works for the scenario they're creating, to adaptations of rule sets that come from the tabletop or the hex encounter world, all coming together, where what we don't need in our rule set is an adjudication through the rules, because the umpire does that. What we need from the rule sets is those combat tables that Jan showed you from the early days. And what we need is the advantage of the play testing that's been done in some of these other environments as we adapt it to the unique communication style that Kriegsspiel allows for. So skill building is a big part of this community, and it's really, I think, one of the features in that it's almost like going to a home-schooled version of a history lesson. You've got other professors on there giving you information, and it's really quite fascinating, and the level of knowledge is really impressive. I'll tell one last story about real world applications, because the term Kriegsspiel is war game in German. And so there would tend to be a thought that the Kriegsspiel is a limiting thing and that you only have to play a very narrow set of games or set of scenarios. But I'll give a real world example of how this could be applied. It has not yet been applied, but could be applied. That's the building I live in Denver. And you see there down on the bottom left, a bridge. And this is actually happening today. So that bridge needs a significant amount of repairs, and it's being administered by a local conservancy or a nonprofit as part of the Greenway in the area. So it's an organization without a lot of funds, or funds that it has to raise on its own. We live in the building. We like to use the bridge, and it's certainly a feature of living in the area. And then the city, of course, administers the whole thing. So we have three constituent groups that are tremendously at odds with each other about how to handle the bridge. The Conservancy doesn't want to pay money to fix the bridge. The building owners want the bridge open, and the city wants to just make sure that there's peace in our time, and that they just don't want us complaining all the time. So you have three constituencies with remarkably different goals, remarkably different needs for outcomes. Nobody understands each other, of course, because everyone is fighting their corner, if you will. And so it just occurred to me as Jan and I were talking about this, about real world applications. This would be an amazing real world application of a double blind umpired simulation, which we wouldn't really call a Kriegsspiel, although if you were to hear the strident shouts of our homeowners association, you might think it's a Krieg. But what we could do is actually create the decision criteria for each of the three constituents, and then actually have everyone walk a mile in the other party's shoes. We could, and we could do this by email. So we're taking advantage of all of the power of Kriegsspiel in the modern age. We could use technology. We could have this be by email. We could have the homeowners group play the conservancy play the city, and the city folks, if they were willing, play the homeowners group. And we could walk through the decision criteria that were needed to be dealt with, and then give a randomized set of circumstances that would change the scenario, such that everyone would have to make decisions from the other person's perspective. And at the end, there would have been a game. It would have been social. It would have used technology, and everyone, not only would they hopefully have had a little bit of enjoyment in terms of getting to know each other, but they would have learned the perspective of the other parties. And this is where we think the most exciting opportunity is with Kriegspiel, in that we can move forward, allowing people to learn while they enjoy the social interaction. And that is what we think Kriegspiel's opportunity is. We want to thanks so much for hearing both the history and the present day situation with Kriegspiel and opportunities that we have. And I wanted to open it back up for any questions. I think now would be time for the discussion. Jan?
Yeah. Let's see if we have any more questions coming in. I don't see any. Gorgeous map. Yeah, indeed it is. We have quite a lot of folks designing maps, or even working up, improving historical maps, like removing all troop formations that might be painted in, and increasing the quality of the drawings and so forth. That's a thing as well.
We haven't had any other questions pop up in the chat that I've seen. So folks, if you've got any, now is your chance to ask. One thing we do want to put in a plug for is we do have one of these Discord run Kriegspiels tomorrow, starting noon Eastern time. If I've got the time wrong, these guys will correct me, but I'm pretty sure we start at noon Eastern time. But there's no special software needed for that. So TTS Vassal, completely irrelevant. Everything plays within the Discord itself. And so this will give you a chance to give it a try without any real technical needs other than be on the Discord, which you already are if you're part of the convention. So
yeah, and that will be a tactical level World War II Eastern Front scenario we'll be playing tomorrow, if you are into that.
That's what I was about to ask.
By one of our umpires, I would say. Otto is really, I don't know, he designs very sophisticated systems, but at the same time, he's very good in providing player briefings and also guides. I've posted them in the public channel on the ACDC Discord if you want to take a look at those, to familiarize players with the doctrines and tactics of the period, which is also an interesting thing. Even though you can have players play without any previous knowledge about the given scenario or the period you're playing, but it is of course beneficial to know a little bit about it.
Yeah, and so again, because of the nature of the Kriegspiel, you don't have to. There's not really a rule set you have to learn. The umpires are going to guide you through that.
Absolutely, yeah, that's very important. Players don't need to know any rules. In fact, even if we have rule sets sometimes which are publicly available on our website or on our Discord server, and we discourage players from reading the rules because we want them to stay out of that sort of gamey mindset, right? When you play Kriegspiel, you're supposed to step into the boots of a commander in the fields and make decisions as a commander in the field would do when we are talking about classical military Kriegspiel, that is. And yeah, some of the folks who are sort of socialized with Total War and all these sort of strategy games, they need to learn a little bit about it. It's not that easy. You don't just grab your whole army and throw it in the face of the enemy and then somehow miraculously win anyways.
I was watching a wrap-up of a tournament play on a board game, and the entire video was about probabilities of success. And so it sounded like two accountants talking about a tax return, right? So they were, this is a 37, this is a 57. So in Kriegsspiel, we really try to avoid that. what we try to avoid is this accountancy approach to problem solving, because ultimately you could create a percentage roll of die and say this battle is won or lost. So we try to get to the actual decision making as the backbone, and so we see these simulations as a series of decisions with outcomes. And even when we do after action reviews, and we try to do we have a few of us who have been in the military, so we try to do a military style after action review. We look at the decisions and then what happened, and so therefore it boils out this calculus and makes it more about I decided to try X and then the Y was the result, and so the umpire allows the ability to mitigate some of that calculating approach to the games.
Right. And another reason I didn't think I didn't mention that why Reiswitz found it so important to include dice. It's not really about randomness. So some gamers would say, well, you have dice, so that's just a random combat outcome. But that's not the point. The point is to somehow incorporate the contingent nature of reality and warfare, and that you don't know what's going on, and that you cannot quite measure morale and the impact of a battalion showing up on your flank suddenly, and what's going to happen. There are quite some cases when you go through the historical sources where the against all odds the most weird outcomes happen, and they have quite a big impact on how the battles developed. And the dice are a way to take the conditions of the units into account and of the terrain into account, and then still have the sort of variety of probable and reasonable outcomes that could occur in a specific range and have moral impacts on the troops and so forth. So that's a very important aspect, which I think when it comes then to free Kriegsspiel, where the umpire just would judge make the judgment call based on their experience, it really goes into a sort of a biased situation, because then you need sort of a team of umpires that have different experiences and that can balance each other out. If there's just the one umpire, you tend to run into sort of a biased resolution of combat situations.
So Ken was asking, he's looking for scenario description and doctrine that you guys had mentioned a few minutes ago, and I think it was for some of the East Front game.
Yes, that is on the ACDC Discord server in the Kriegsspiel category in the channel Kriegsspiel Lobby.
Yeah.
There's the map we're using. There's a Tabletop Simulator module, even though, as pointed out, you don't need Tabletop Simulator to play. And there are the Soviet and German commander handbooks and player guides.
So Ken, if you're registered for the ACDC, it's in the Discord server that you've got the invite for, and you can scroll down on the left side where the channels are. You're looking for the Kriegsspiel one, and if you expand that, you will see in there where Jan has posted those things. I will say, for folks that have other slightly more detailed questions or are looking for links or information where you can share stuff, you can either pop in that Kriegsspiel channel, although that one we're trying to keep contained to the stuff relevant to the game that's going to run tomorrow. There's also in the Discord server for the convention, and like folks watching this, a year and a half later after the fact, sorry, the Discord's gone. You don't get to see it there, but what you can do is in the seminars tab, it's right under it's the second category in the Discord server for the convention. In the seminars tab, there's a text channel for each of the seminars also. So you can pop open the one for the 200 years of modern wargaming Kriegsspiel channel in there and ask questions, share links about this particular presentation. So things that go beyond the game session that's going to be running tomorrow, that's a good place to ask those questions. And Jan and Paul and the guys are keeping an eye on that also, where you can exchange info there. So that's that is a place where you can get more info there. So you do actually have a question here, Jan.
Yeah, I just saw that. What are the dice used for? Okay, so let's go back to the dice. What you can see here in the background. Let me move that thing out of the way and get this a little bit bigger for you. Oops.
Well, I'm going to pull you and me off the screen for a second here.
Sure. So These are the dice used in the 1828 system. There are 6 dice, as you can see by the Roman indication in the bottom left corner here, the 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, and so forth. Those are picked based on the strength ratio between the fighting units and adjusted by the circumstances like terrain, exhaustion, and so forth. Then you roll that one, and based on the colored bottom corner here, right corner, that tells you which side wins the combat. Let's say we have a close combat situation, like a melee, and we throw die number 3 here, which has a black outcome, a white, a black, black, and black. That would mean that if this side or this side, let's say it's side 1, 2, 3, if 2 or 3 was rolled, then the side would lose, which actually is in an advantage position. If the black result came, then the advantaged unit would win. Furthermore, it tells you by these letters here, G, R, and T, how badly the loser is beaten. This is geschlagen, Rückzug, und total geschlagen. So that's beaten, retreat, and totally beaten. And depending on that, the unit must retreat a given amount of paces, and it may not engage enemy units. In some situations, if it's totally beaten, it may not even defend itself. If it's attacked again, it will be overrun. However, if there is a secondary reserve line, then a totally beaten result just switches over to retreat, I believe. Furthermore, these dice also show the different types of artillery. So we have howitzers here, die number 1 and 2, those are howitzers. Then we have 6-pounders and 12-pounders. So you pick those dice and you roll them if there is fire combat going on, and you can see based on the ranges and the type of shot that is fired. So K, this is canister fire. Then we have the classic rolling shot like iron balls and so forth. And the condition in which the artillery is firing. So if it has a free field of fire, or are there, I don't know, bushes or trees or rolling terrain in between the guns and the target, then you would read the points, the casualty points. So actual the number of men is translated into casualty points, and those are applied. So different units have different amount of hit points, so to say. Infantry battalions, cavalry squadrons, skirmisher screens, they all have different amount of hit points, and the umpires would then detract that number of losses from the unit. And then on the far right here, you have the small arms die, basically with the 6 phases, which is there a half battalion firing? Are there skirmishers firing, or are there Jäger firing? And at which distance? And then again, is the target in cover or not? When we switch over to the Chischwitz routes here.
If anybody ever complains about how complicated a CRT is, you can always pull this up.
This is a CRT from the day, right? And so
yes.
Right.
In Tabletop Simulator, for example, you can actually modify a die with description that actually will give you this level of complexity.
Yeah, and I would even say the dice or the combat result table aren't the most difficult thing in the historical Kriegsspiel systems. Yeah. It's all the detailed routes that come on top of, well, if this happens, then that, and if not, then that, and if this happens really, that, then you need to take into account this and so forth. So that's the very, very difficult stuff you need
just to zoom in so people can see. This is the Kriegsspiel dice that are sold by Command Post Games. This is one of the zoomed in versions, and they have the rules on their site also that explain to you what all these different values are for. But it is essentially the CRT actually pasted onto the die itself. So rather than roll a die and then go look up a bunch of stuff, you're rolling the die and literally reading what shows up on the die face to tell you what's going to happen. So
yeah,
in our, modern
streamlined.
implementation of this, Brand, or in our modern implementation, we emphasize what is a believable result. What is a reasonable and believable result, such that the player says, okay, well, if I was doing X and that happened, that makes sense. So we actually move away from that level of complexity in our games, trying to move toward a believable result.
Yeah. Folks, we're going to have to wrap this up here because in 5 minutes, we've got Jim Werbineth starting one of his talks. So again, Jan and Paul are around all weekend. And so you can add questions in the Discord around Kriegspiel in general. If you've got questions or thoughts about the specific event being run tomorrow or wanting some more information before jumping in, you can do that in the game specific channel that they've already started to set up for the different player roles, because everybody's going to have their own channel where you're getting talked to in there. But that's a place where you may want to jump in and give it a whirl. Like that's the whole point of the conventions like these. So, try something different, try something new. Guys, thank y'all very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So, and audience, thanks for hanging with us. And we'll be back in a couple of minutes with a new stream, with Jim Werbineth's thing. And those of you watching this like 2.5 years later, it's Kriegspiel.org with 2 S's in the middle. But it's Kriegspiel.org. It's the International Kriegsspiel Society. They've got all kinds of events happening at all times, both online and in the real world. So go check out their calendars and find out where they got the next stuff coming. So cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thanks.